morning, everyone. It's 9:30, so we'll begin the forum now. I want to welcome all of you. I see a few new faces, so welcome if it's your first forum. And if you're not, then you probably know that we are kind of wrapping up our season, as it were. We do these forums from September until June. And so next Sunday is the last scheduled forum. There could be some unexpected ones during the middle of the summer, but we normally go on a pause. I am Jeff Peckrell, and I'm currently the chairperson of the forum. And I'm the co-chairperson of the Human Rights Working Group, which this is really a project of the Human Rights Working Group. Dolores Perez-Heilbrunn and Melvin Starks are the other co-chairs of the group. So we collectively welcome you and invite you to become involved in this committee, in this project, if you're interested in doing that, okay? Because we could really use that help. Last Sunday, we had a great presentation called It's Fascism. So what are we going to do about it? If you were here then, I see a lot of faces that were at the protest yesterday. That was one of the things they asked us to do, was to get out there and express your views about what's going on in this country. So the protest yesterday, I thought, was really amazing. It was really empowering. A lot of people were there. It was just great. So we need to keep it up, I believe. That is what we need to do, is to keep getting out there in the streets and expressing our unhappiness with what they are doing. Okay, just a few announcements. So next Sunday, I mentioned, is the last scheduled forum. We're having Bill Shields, who is a labor organizer who's presented here before. And I understand from Melvin, who arranged the speaker, that it's part one of Labor Fest, which is something external to the church, but he'll be speaking about labor issues around the Bay, perhaps. Is that about right, Melvin? Something like that. The the harming of the unions, the federal unions and things like that. Okay. Just a little bit about Q&A. We always go over this every meeting. So we have cards on all the tables and chairs. And so if you have questions for our speakers, and I'm sure you will, please jot them down and I'll be collecting them up. And at around 10:15, I'll come up here and ask the questions. And there might be some from anybody who's on Zoom as well. And our speakers will answer them at that time. And of course, it just goes without saying that to be respectful with your questions. You might disagree with something that our speakers have said. That wouldn't be impossible, but just be polite with your questions. And right, I think that's everything we need to go over. Oh, there's another announcements after church next Sunday. We have scheduled a bonus for you. We have a Global Conversations. This is another one of our projects that we do at the Human Rights Working Group. This one is called Students Speak Out, Immigration and Liberation, American Law and Disorder. So about this time last year in June, we had some students from University of San Francisco who were part of the encampments movement that were protesting for Palestinian solidarity. And it was a great meeting. I wasn't there, but I heard it was really great. And we have several of them back. So it'll be 3 speakers. They're all from the law school there, I believe. And please come for that next Sunday after church at 12:30, from 12:30 to 2:30. All right. So that's all in announcements. And now we'll do our Ohlone land recognition.
We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, acknowledge that our community is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone tribes, the original inhabitants on this peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working here, and we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples. The Greater Bay Area is also the ancestral territory of the Miwok, Yokuts, Patwin, and other tribes. As the original stewards of this land, the indigenous peoples understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony in nature for millennia. We honor them now for their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth. Thank you.
Okay, our 2 presenters today are Raja Khouri and Jeffrey Wilkinson. They are both in Toronto, Canada today. Hope I said that right. Toronto, right? Not Toronto. That flags you instantly as a person who hasn't been there. Okay. And they have written a book called The Wall Between, which I would imagine is both metaphorical and an allusion to the physical wall that exists between the West Bank and Israel proper, or actually within the West Bank for the most part. And so they'll be talking about that. I neglected to print out your bios with, so I cannot properly introduce you. I will ask you to do that yourselves. Do your intros to yourselves, but they are scholars and on this topic of Israel and Palestinian reconciliation. So, without further ado, I'll just turn it over to Jeffrey and Raja. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for inviting us to be with you today. Name is Raja Khouri. I was born in Lebanon to Palestinian parents who had fled the war in 1948 in Palestine and were not allowed to return to their homes. So they settled in Lebanon, and that's where myself and my siblings were born. My background is in human rights, and about 18 years ago, I decided to start talking to Zionists. Most people in the Palestinian community would avoid talking to Zionists because that, to them, that accepts what Zionism has done to Palestinians since 1947-48, and that hasn't been recognized. 1948, of course, is known as the year of the Nakba. Nakba meaning catastrophe in Arabic. And that's when, about 80% of the Palestinian people were either fled or were pushed out of their homes in Palestine and were not allowed to return and end up being refugees in the surrounding countries. Now, yes, our book is called The Wall Between: What Jews and Palestinians Don't Want to Know About Each Other. And it's important to note that our book was released on October 3rd, 2023. So 4 days before the events of October 7 and the war on Gaza that followed, and the war on Lebanon that followed, and on Syria, and today on Iran. So a lot has happened since, and often we are asked, how these events may have changed our relationship with each other, and you'll find out today that our relationship has only gotten stronger because we believe we have the same values. We believe in the same values of human rights, justice, freedom. Nothing earth-shattering. These are the values that we in the West proclaim to be our values, and we take them to heart. Jeff arrived at these values through his Judaism. I arrived at them through my human rights work, and that's where we met. And Jeff will tell you more about how we met. But today, I'd like to tell you that after the many years of dialogue with Zionists that I've engaged in have been very enriching in terms of understanding that there are many kinds of Zionists, that they come, and understanding what they believe and why they believe it, which of course doesn't mean agreement, but at least it's the first step towards peace, is to understand the other and remove them from that status of being the other and making them into someone, a human beings that we're trying to sort of coexist with and have peaceful and productive relationships with, which is, of course, the opposite of the last almost 80 years of enmity and loss and war and oppression and so on. We will be talking about that. Over to you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, Raja, and thank you to the group for having us. So I'm Jeffrey. Usually in our talks, one of the first things I have to do is because I'm just imagining the wrinkled faces who go, how could a guy named Wilkinson be Jewish? So the very short story is my mother, was a German Jew, much of whose family was lost, in the Shoah. She came to the United States after the war with two very fractured and difficult identities, Jewish and German, which she was trying to flee both of those as rapidly as she possibly could. And as part of that, she married an Irish Roman Catholic atheist named James Wilkinson, which is where my name comes from. Our family lineage name is Cohen, and so I am stuck with this very Anglo-sounding name. Raja often refers to me as Dr. Wilkenstein, just to kind of clarify things. I am also I'm also American. I was born in Binghamton, New York, and that's the harder part for Raja to forgive me for than being Jewish. Um, Particularly in today's time. How I came to this is like most stories. It's not a straight line. It's a circuitous route. I didn't grow up like many Jews with a deep sort of sense of Zionism. Um, Certainly it was there, but it wasn't a main part of my life. As I uh, um, uh, My view of the world is through music. I am a classical violist and music teacher, composer, etc. And that was the framing of my life through the arts. And somewhere along the way, I got interested in human rights, and I moved kind of back and forth between teaching and doing human rights work, um, and equity facilitation. And somehow in my early 50s ended up in a master's program and then a doctoral program where I, for the first time in my life, started really encountering a privilege I never considered being a privilege, which is being Jewish. Um, that's probably the moment, maybe now 18 years ago or so, where I really started to question why there were certain things that I could do freely that my Palestinian Arab or Muslim colleagues were challenged as being identity driven. And that led to a doctoral project on the memory and trauma of Israel-Palestine, where I interviewed Jews and Palestinians and had them listen to each other's stories. And Raja was one of my participants. And after this was done, I was, so moved by his sort of unique ability to advocate for his people while having sensitivity to mine that we started talking. And when we say talking, we really mean listening. We mean asking questions. We mean starting with simplistic things like, why do X do X? What do Jews mean when they say? What do Palestinians mean when they say? Because we are really taught to not encounter the other. From a cognitive science perspective, our brains see new information generally as dangerous. So we resist it and move away from it. So the encounter with the other is immediately a threat to our assumption that our worldview is somehow superior. As we talk to you today, clearly in an organization that is focused on human rights, and as we are appalled with the authoritarian movements throughout the world, including in the US, is these are really driven by a sense of exceptionalism, that the norms of the game don't apply to us, that we set our own rules. The recent attack by Israel on Iran, we believe, comes from a perspective that what we do is not subject to the same moral interpretations to what other people do. And that the responses that we want, we can insist on rather than ask for. That we don't have to negotiate. We don't have to wrestle like everyone else does. We can just sort of, kind of impinge our will on others. So our work is this very delicate sort of balance. So as Raja said, our book came out right before October 7th. We had a beautiful, big, splashy display with our publisher, and lots of Jews and Palestinian Zionists, non-Zionists, all kinds of folks came out and had a real celebration of listening to each other, of bridge building. And then October 7th happened, 2023. And we really found out, unfortunately, that our prescription in our book, which is that we have become intentionally polarized, because as long as we're apart, we don't have to learn, we don't have to change, we don't have to shift, became so evident. And we've spent the last sort of 19 months, mostly in Canada, some in the US, on college campuses, workplaces, media organizations, government, non-governmental groups, really trying to create some form of deep discourse that is human rights centered while still being able to acknowledge the trauma on both groups. As you can imagine, this is not easy work. Our rooting, as Raja said, is in our values. For me as a Jew, those values are rooted in tikkun olam, to prepare the world, to live with the stranger, to be able to use a Hebrew term called galut, which means exile, as a practical mission to live with our other, not to dominate the other. Zionism for me, in its perfect, if it ever had a perfect view, would be able to be a place for Jews with equal rights for all. What we understand today, and what I've understood over my journey, is that Zionism, whatever it might have given to me as a Jew, it took from Raja, and therefore it is unsustainable and completely immoral, both to my Judaism and to my humanity. So I have deep empathy for why my community needs to have this parachute. But I truly believe that if your concern is Jewish safety, in Israel or on college campuses, then the only way to achieve that is through true equality and safety for all.
Now, it's important to remember that, our book is about our communities here in the diaspora, particularly in North America, Canada, and the United States. And it doesn't, it's not exactly about the conflict over there, but of course, indirectly, it is about the conflict over there. It is how we interpret and bring the conflict over there to over here. So that's why we said Jews and Palestinians rather than Israelis and Palestinians, because it's about us here in North America. And often people who come from over there and find the state of affairs, if you want, between our communities here the way it is, and are very surprised. They ask questions like, "You really had to make it even worse rather than try and improve on the conflict over there and not bring it over here and live this kind of polarized existence with communities in the same city that you are." And frankly, that was one of my main motivations in writing this book. As someone with a human rights background, it bothered me that there were two communities, one Jewish and the other one Palestinian, Arab, that lived side by side, but felt very distrustful of each other. At best, distrustful. Mostly it's hateful, fearful, and not only do they not know each other or they do not know about each other a whole lot, but they don't want to know about each other. It's funny. Right after the book was printed, I had a box of it sitting in my office at home, and my housekeeper happened to be here, looked at the book, read the title of the book, "What Jews and Palestinians Don't Want to Know About Each Other," and she went, "Yeah, well, of course." And I asked her, "What do you mean, of course?" She said, "Well, if you know about the other, then you have to start compromising." And and like Jeff said earlier, we are in that state where we don't want to compromise. We're comfortable with the hate that we have in us towards the other. It's a zero-sum game. It's a binary. We're good, they're bad, and you don't have to think much about it. You don't have to struggle with it. And of course, there are those of us who are struggling with it. And these are the folks who believe in common humanity, in common values and common rights, freedom for all. And these are the folks who are really struggling with it because it is not binary. And for us in writing this book, we wanted to make two things clear. One is, the role that trauma plays in how we behave, how we react. And the second part is how that trauma gets manipulated by advocacy lobby groups with agendas. We call these groups bad actors, bad with two Ds, because what they do is blame, attack, demonize, and dismiss the other. Demonization is at the heart of the state of polarization that we're living with right now, and not just with respect to Israel-Palestine, but if you look at, American politics, this kind of polarization, what makes it so difficult is that it's not a disagreement over ideas, it's an agreement over who you are versus who I am, and you being bad and me being good. I'm sure Jeff will talk a little bit more about trauma. That's his field. That's the work that he did on Palestinians and Jews and their traumas. So I'll give it back to you, my friend. And
Okay. Well, so I mean, there's a lot to cover. So I think what we want to do is be able to leave you with, by the end and after your questions, a real sense of where are we going? What There is a lot of people doing different work. Our work is probably labeled in three specific ways. We recognize and live within the huge discrepancy in power between the groups. We never for a moment, are suggesting that these are two equal combatants. We don't even use words like conflict because an occupation isn't a conflict. A blockade isn't a conflict. Um, it is so easy to think the absolute worst of quote unquote the other side. So we very much intentionally try to break some of that down. Um, Sometimes for Palestinians and their supporters, we might be seen as people who do something that's sometimes referred to as normalization. So we want to be really clear that because our work is over here, having a conversation with those who have difficulty with is not normalizing the inherent difficulty. It's bringing light to it and talking to the people who can actually do something about it. It's different over there. It's harder over there. And in spite of that, there are many groups on the ground in Israel-Palestine who work tirelessly together every day, Jews and Palestinians, to be able to break things down. One group is called Standing Together that we work closely with, and there are many, many others. So we want to really be clear that we also have legitimacy, we feel, because we call out our own communities. I spend most of my energy pushing back on my community. It's not my role, job, or inclination to encourage or tell Palestinians how to resist their oppression. It is my job to remind my community that being Jewish should mean something and that what we have become really is sort of a sense of collective narcissists, moving deeply inward, considering our pain as the only pain, is not only inhumane, but deeply anti-Jewish. Values, if they are to be universal, are not, we can't select them based on our comfort or even our safety. And these are difficult challenges. Our our role around trauma is really to understand that a trauma reaction to anything is the brain's basic instinct to protect itself. And it is a way of using the fast part of the brain called the amygdala and back part, and to keep the prefrontal cortex or the thinking logical part as asleep as possible. Because once you engage in what something is rather than what it feels like, you start to have a different image of what's happening. Once you're able to engage with someone deeply in their humanity, you're not talking about a set of beliefs or a set of ideas. You're talking about a set of relational constructs. The traumatized brain reads all of these with red alerts. And we start our whole conversation, our whole work is based on the idea that in different but clear ways, the Palestinian and Jewish communities are deeply traumatized communities. We don't we don't qualify them as equal. We don't compare the Holocaust to the Nakba. We compare the traumas. We call them meta narratives. The Holocaust and the Holocaust and the Nakba are these driving forces to why the two communities feel how they feel about themselves and about the other. So if we are able to begin to break down those narratives in a way that is accepting and appreciative of the pain of each person, we do work called building emotionally centered communities, starting with shared grief. How do we build a relationship based on this shared pain that allows us to have a space once we get into difficult situations to go back to what's the root of it? What's the pain of it? We live with deep frustration at how truly horrific the process has been for a long time, but certainly, the horrors of Gaza, the uptick in violence in the West Bank that's been going on for a very long time. We want people to view these through a human lens. We don't want them to be identity driven. We don't want people to say, well, the Jews are the good guys, so we don't really care that much about the other. Or the Palestinians are the only righteous cause, and therefore we only need to consider them. We don't want to replace one set of oppressions with a new set of oppressions. We want to change how we talk about it. And perhaps this time, Raja, we can get a little bit into the depth of our work, which is really to explain the deeply held narratives from one side to the other. I'm sure you're aware that probably the root of much of the polarization in the diaspora is around the definition and considerations of anti-Semitism. To be Jewish is to be on the lookout for anti-Semitism for most Jews, not all, obviously. And to be Palestinian or Arab or Muslim and a supporter is to see anti-Semitism primarily as a weapon to silence. So we're going to read you two very short excerpts from our book. Our book looks like this, if you're ever looking for it. And we'll just read you a short little excerpt. All right. Are you good, buddy?
Yes, we are.
All right. To a Jew, anti-Semitism is a past trauma, a present trauma, and an almost guaranteed future trauma. Anti-Semitism is a thread that runs through the tapestry of Jewish life. It is ever present, foreboding, and certain. It weaves its way, often surreptitiously and silently, through even the happiest of times. It is the monster whose haunting presence breathes down one's neck, refusing to allow any Jew to forget its existence.
To a Palestinian, anti-Semitism is a muzzle, a weapon to silence, defend, and deflect from or otherwise discredit critics of Israel's actions. It is a club to clobber the heads of those taking a stand for Palestine, and the shackle that ties down the hands of solidarity. It is the boot that presses down one's neck, choking speech, silencing thought, removing voice, and eliminating hope. It's an occupation of the narrative. Anti-Semitism is this powerful force that, in effect, ends up oppressing both Jews and Palestinians. I'd like to note that, I was in my late 40s when I heard for the first time that Zionism being described as a movement for self-determination for the Jewish people. Um, that's how far the narratives of the two communities are from each other. I had not this what I just described Zionism as is known, very known to every Jew from almost from birth. And it's something that I've never heard before, because Zionism to me was how Zionism was described in my community's narrative, and that it's a destructive force. To us, to Palestinians, Zionism equals Israel and everything Israel has done. So, to me, I fully support the right of the Jewish people for self-determination. I have absolutely no issue with that. Except that I'd like to point out to my Jewish colleagues is that everything that Zionism gave them, it took from me. And Zionism ended up in my bedroom. So, and that bedroom is still a place I cannot go to. My father could not go back to the home that he was born in, or my mother. I was able to go find the home that my mother grew up in Ramleh in Palestine in 2008, and sort of just take a look inside and then go back home. That's the extent of my access to Palestine. And today, that access to Palestine remains at the when I say Palestine, I'm talking about historic Palestine, the land between the river and the sea, as it's often referred to, the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And the whatever peace solutions have been put on the table so far always try to divide this land between Jews and Palestinians. Whether it was the Peel Commission in 36 or it was the United Nations partition plan or the Oslo Accords, trying to partition the land in a way that did not give equal access to the land for those people. And that's why these peace efforts have fallen flat and did not succeed. So when we talk about, Zionism, it's seen differently by each side, as are almost every single aspect of this struggle that has been going on for 80 years. In talking to Jeff, I started realizing how threatening Palestinian resistance is to a Jew. Palestinian resistance is, of course, resistance to the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem that happened in 1967, in the 1967 war, where these lands were conquered by Israel. And, we don't hear about this occupation unless there's fighting and bombing and killing happening. And we don't recognize that this occupation, by its nature, like any occupation, is oppressive. Oppressive in the sense that Palestinians have been living for the last 58 years under a military rule that allows them very little by way of rights. They live a state of ongoing violence with checkpoints stopping them from or delaying them from going to work to go to see their families, trying to move products, and the ability of Israeli soldiers to walk into your house at 2 o'clock in the morning, search it, interrogate you, interrogate your children, often abusing you physically in front of your children. All of that is part of what an occupation is. The Germans did it in the Second World War, where the areas where they occupied, and Israel has been doing it since 1967 on Palestinian lands. It's just the nature of an occupation. It's oppressive, it's violent, and it is meant to keep you in your place so that you do not rebel or resist it, repel to it or resist it. But the idea of resistance to Israel resonates here in North America among the Jewish community in a different way. And I'd like to hand that over back to Jeff to talk about that.
Right. Yes. So I'll do my best, buddy. Um, I mean, I think, perhaps our audience you would probably like to be able to understand a little bit more deeply the polarization that you've watched, on your campuses. I mean, your streets, in your churches, in synagogues, in mosques, particularly over the last year and a half, but certainly before then as well. Um, the root of when we say the root is trauma, it tends to feel like a sort of a oversimplification. So I'll lay out sort of a map to kind of understand a little bit. So we don't process things like trauma, like deep emotional impact, with a whole lot of sort of logical facts. We deal with it from a very sentimental, sort of intuitive nature. So if you would imagine, for example, the the length of Jewish history and the way we've taught that history, it is 2,000 plus years of danger. Um, this early danger started with rival groups that would take over areas and remove two destructions of the temple, the most recent at about 70 CE. Not allow Jews to practice their faith, um, all kinds of pogroms and scourges. Uh, then went to what we might refer to as Catholic or faith-based anti-Semitism, which really dominated the landscape from about 400 CE to mid to late 19th century, which was really based on the notion that Jews are an enemy of Christianity, that either they killed Jesus or that they prevented the prophetic sort of coming of the Messiah and for it to be what it was to be. For Jews, for religious Jews, they believe the Messiah has not come yet. Um, I was never taught an experience of being against Jesus, just that he wasn't really part of my faith experience. Um, so I think the important part, to start with is how these sort of manifested. Through the Middle Ages, they manifested something you've probably heard of called the blood libel, where were really wild conspiratorial theories that Jews used the blood of children to make their matzah at Passover time. Um, the 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 old stories of Shylock and usuries, because Jews couldn't own property and couldn't own most businesses and couldn't teach in schools. Their primary profession was usury. Um, when people owe you money, that often creates resentment. So the Jewish experience is this very long continuation. The Spanish Inquisition of 1498, the leading up, slowly creeping through the mid 19th century to more of a race-based anti-Semitism promoted by Nietzsche and others, ending in the Holocaust. So if you just for a moment look at that brain, that traumatized brain, it landed in Israel-Palestine 3 years after the Holocaust war broke out, 2.5 years. To the traumatized brain, The Arabs, the Arab countries, the Arab nations, Palestinians as a whole, were simply the next iteration of those that wanted to kill us. The brain does not do well with separating who the enemy is or why they are against us. It only perceives threat. So to put it in its crudest form, to the traumatized Jewish brain, Palestinians are the newest iteration of the Nazis or the Spaniards or Russian pogroms. And that really has built its way into what Israel has become. Israel is not a nation state in the same way that we consider other nation states. It is a force field resistance against elimination. It is a both emotional and physical parachute in case we need it. Many Jewish colleagues will say to us that whenever we've left it up to someone else, it did not go well for us. And that's where the idea of self-determination came from. I just want to be clear that self-determination for lots of people have been accomplished without a state. Having a state is one form of self-determination. So why is all this so important? It forces us to look at the problem as something that is emotional and relational and narrative driven, not as a problem on two people that are inherently unable to cooperate with each other, because actually that is not the history. For centuries, Jews and Palestinians cooperated quite well in the Middle East, with rare exceptions. So today's struggle or conflict, whatever you want to call it, is really about land. It is in some very simple ways two national projects landed in a small space at relatively the same time. And as Raja said, though we don't promote a particular solution, we believe in that projects like Land for All, which you can learn about, that allow the access to the entire space for everyone, is the only long-term just solution. If it starts with a two-state of some form, who cares? But we want to be really clear to our audience that when you hear narratives from progressive, liberal-minded Zionists about a two-state solution, it does come from a place of goodness and compassion, but it is a Western solution to a Middle Eastern problem. It solves a lot of problems for the US and Western powers. It doesn't necessarily solve the Palestinian question because it doesn't provide permanent safety. It doesn't provide permanent citizenship and rights to all the inhabitants of the land. So when we look at it strictly from a human rights, social justice perspective, the only outcome that is going to assure that is some form of access to all of it. Why it matters so much here is we live our lives rhetorically. We hear these constant, sort of proclamations. You'll hear protesters called lovers of Hamas or Hamas supporters. We have been with them. This is not the main experience at all. It's a very fringe group. Yes, occupation has created a great deal of anger and frustration, which any of us would feel if we've experienced. I had someone ask us once, why are the Palestinians resistant to peace? I said, well, let's be careful about that narrative, first of all. But if you would imagine for a minute, if I came and took your house and then kind of rethought it years down the road and said, okay, I'll give you back that drafty bedroom on the third floor. Are you okay with that? I imagine you wouldn't be. So we try to create conversations that are about justice and values while understanding the deep traumatic impacts on both groups.
Sorry.
I was going to say maybe we're close to time for questions, but go ahead, Raja.
We are just one final sort of thought. We talked a little bit about the Palestinian trauma, and I'd like to say a little bit more about that and end by looking at October 7 from that lens. So as I mentioned earlier, we talked about the Nakba 1948. was more than just the loss of property and loss of land. It was a loss of identity. People became strangers in a land that wasn't theirs. Often they were mistreated, whether they were in Lebanon or Jordan or Syria. And it was a loss of identity, a loss of future. It became much harder. And then, of course, in the 1967 war, there was further loss. And since the 1967 war and the start of the occupation, the settlement building on occupied lands was further loss for the Palestinians. So they've lived this history of losses. This is what Zionism and Israel means to Palestinians. It's this constant loss and having to uh, leave something behind for someone else. Now, when October 7 happened, I initially was surprised by the intensity of the emotion in the Jewish community about what happened. Okay, it was, it was a horrible war crime, what happened on October 7. No one denies that. 1,200 people were lost, 200 people or so were taken hostage. And this was not the first Gaza war. There have been many Gaza wars that I'm sure we're all familiar with. And in each Gaza war, thousands of Palestinians would be killed. So without that kind of strong emotional reaction. But then I started understanding with Jeff's help, with the trauma lens, is that what happened on October 7 was a repeat of the Holocaust. Was the Holocaust happening again? Because this is the largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, and it triggered that fear, the danger, the threat, the enormity of the Holocaust came back, even though the event itself was nowhere near comparable to the Holocaust. Now, to Palestinians, what's been happening since October 7 in Gaza, again, is 1948 happening again, 1967 happening again. The people in Gaza, the Palestinians, being moved from one place to the other, living in tents like they did after each war, and being, killed in large numbers, being treated inhumanely, losing their institutions, the school, universities, hospitals, everything was destroyed. Another loss and a continuation of the Nakba in Palestinian minds. And with this, now we look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We do have some questions. Self-determination. This comes up a lot in discussing this issue, and it also comes up in talks about other post-colonial struggles around the world. Raja, I believe I heard you say that you support the right of Jewish people to self-determination. And Jeffrey, you spoke about how self-determination doesn't necessarily require a nation state. What is self-determination, and how is it possible for one group to have it without taking away the rights and property of another people?
I can get us started, Jeff. I mean, it's
Please.
like if you look at Canada, for instance, Quebec is the French province, and the French were one of the two founding nations of this country. They have self-determination as a province within a country called Canada. So, I mean, that's an example of self-determination, without having a country as such. The idea of self-determination is about being able to influence your trajectory in life, your economic trajectory, your livelihood, your what you do, and what kind of values you believe in. Um, the the extent to which Zionism has taken that idea of self-determination is that it's central in it that Israel be a Jewish majority state, and not just that, but have laws in it that actually give more rights to its Jewish citizens than it does to non-Jewish citizens. By law, it's called the nation-state law that proclaims Judaism and Jewish identity as central, to being Israeli. Over to you, Jeff.
Well, sure. I think what I'll add is this, like all deep struggles, they often come down to sort of flashpoint words that are oversimplified. So one of the things, my community and many others will say, we haven't talked about Christian Zionism today, which particularly in the US is a very powerful force in this conversation, is that we hear words like Israel has the right to exist. What I think we believe is to consider a state's or a nation's duty to its people over its right. So does the only right of any state or entity to exist is if its people support it. And its duty is to the rights of its people. And we certainly believe that over the past many decades, Israel has failed to support the rights of all of its people. So we don't threaten its right to exist. We call on its duty to actually create an existence that is livable and sustainable for all the inhabitants of the land. So try to always, when you hear these sort of pithy words, to dissect them, what's behind it. Self-determination for Jews has become really an exceptionalist narrative. We get to proclaim something that we're going to have no matter what it takes from anybody else. And that's a problem.
Thank you. Camping onto that question, why do most Israelis and their supporters deny that Israel is an apartheid state?
You want me to start that one, or?
Well, if you're pumped up for it, go ahead.
Well, I'll give it a try. So again, apartheid is one of those very powerful words, right? So the first thing I want to say is that because a word is applied, it doesn't mean it's the same as the way it's been applied elsewhere. So if you come to conclusions, which many human rights organizations have come to conclusions, including Israeli human rights organizations, that the function of the state of Israel is an apartheid function. Exactly what I mean by that is that it is not equal. It's enshrined in law that it's not equal. And there is a force, a military, political, and governmental force that ensures that inequality is perpetual. That does not mean that it's the same as South Africa. We, for a very long time, didn't use the term because it is a flashpoint, particularly in my community. The word apartheid for Jews, both there and here, is using words that apply to non-democratic, unhumane sources, to us who are democratic, caring, loving people. So in a way, it's a way of dismissing our cause as proper by saying we're just like all those other bad guys. It's dealing with it in a very fast, sort of emotional thinking way and not a sustainable, logical way, which is to say, are the actions and laws of the Israel government treating one group of people with inequality? The last thing I'll say about it is it has been easier for many Jews, particularly sort of progressives, to be able to use the word apartheid for the occupied territories, but not for Israel proper. It's just a very uncomfortable truth that it is better to be an Arab citizen of Israel than it is to be in the West Bank, and certainly better than Gaza. But it is not equal. The laws are designed for inequality. You can get a permit as a Jew to build a new house on your property in days. You usually can't get a permit to add a bathroom to an Arab home. So apartheid should be analyzed from a place of legal inequality, not from an emotional place of who you're accusing it of.
I'll just add that conventional wisdom among Zionist Jews is that uh, uh, their safety, whether it's in Toronto or in San Francisco or anywhere, is can only be guaranteed by the existence of a state of Israel, and that is a Jewish majority state. So anything that threatens Israel's existence becomes a threat to their own safety in Toronto or San Francisco or anywhere else. And, by saying that Israel is an apartheid state, it's seen as a threat to its existence, that you're calling it apartheid to discredit it. And if you discredit it, then you're threatening its existence. And threatening Israel's existence is a threat to my own safety here in North America.
Thank you. Someone has asked me to announce that the book is for sale here. I don't see copies of it back there, but perhaps they are here. And of course, it's available online, right? Excuse me. Much has been said about Netanyahu mostly ignoring the threat of Hamas shortly before October 7th. Please comment on this, in effect allowing more than 1,000 Jews to be killed so as to have a rationale for genocide of Palestinians in Gaza.
You can go back to the early days of the establishment of Hamas in the early 80s. Hamas was established as a Islamic or Islamist resistance movement, believing in armed resistance against the Israeli occupation. Its original charter called for the destruction of Israel, to regain all of Palestine's land to Palestinians. Now, at that time, the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, was recognized worldwide as the representative of the Palestinian people. And Israel's interest at that point in time was creating and having an alternative to the PLO to weaken it. And that idea remained, and with Netanyahu, who never wanted a two-state solution. He really never wanted a two-state solution, never really committed to it. He wanted to keep things the way they are. It was perfect to have Hamas contesting who speaks on behalf of the Palestinian people with the PLO, because then he can say, look at them. Who do I negotiate peace with? There's no one to negotiate peace with. So the division of Palestinian leadership was in Israel's interest. And, Netanyahu was allowing the government of Qatar to transfer funds on an ongoing basis to Hamas. And these funds were used to create these tunnels and buy whatever explosive and so on that they needed to buy to continue the armed struggle to Israel's occupation.
And excellent. The only thing I'll add is that I don't personally think that it's worth spending a lot of energy supposing that there was some kind of grand conspiracy behind allowing quote unquote October 7th to happen. I think the context that Raja gave is important because Hamas is always simplified into just this monstrous, group that only cares about killing Jews. So it's a lot easier to demonize a group than to negotiate or work with them.
And it's important to remember that Hamas is a product of Gaza. It's a product of the conditions in Gaza. And the regular folks in Gaza have been living under blockade since 2007 that prevented them from leaving without special permits that are almost impossible to bring. The air that they breathe in Gaza has to be allowed in by Israel. And I'm exaggerating here just to give you a sense of how much life in Gaza depended on Israel.
Thank you. We have two questions relating to trauma. These are good questions because they're really central to the themes of your book. One person, I'll read them both. One person asked, is the trauma both of you refer to similar to the trauma experienced in an airplane crash or a house fire? What may be the significant differences? And the other question is, can you please talk about the PTSD experienced by IDF, that's the Israeli Defense Forces, soldiers who are returning from destruction of Gaza? What is the effect of that on the historical trauma?
Wow, those are great questions. Um, so I think I don't want to get into the deep sort of social psychological weeds, but these two questions get at a root of something. Trauma is misread as a past experience. Trauma is the recurrence of the past in our present story, narrative, memory, and tellings. It is very easy to see trauma as an historical fact of something that happened that we're hurt by. Trauma is an event that we then create a story and identity about that fits with a narrative that we've likely already constructed. So I see the events, the continuing events, for example, of the suffering of Palestinians, less like an airplane and more like a permanent root canal. The sense that you're being dismantled, your body is being worked on, reconstructed, harmed consistently, hit at, hit at, hit at, hit at. It's like an ongoing hurricane, as if the hurricane lasted for decades instead of a couple of hours. Um, uh, to be able to talk about the PTSD question is a more complex one. To begin with, I generally resist the idea of post-traumatic stress because, as I said, trauma is the recurrence of past in the present. So it is traumatic stress at the moment. It may be triggered by something that occurred, but what is causing the pain is how it's being told and remembered within the body, the somatic experience of reaction and pain to it. There certainly is and should be a deep concern about Jewish youth. Um, a parent, an Israeli parent, every Israeli parent who has children knows that that child is going to end up in the army. That changes how they parent. That changes how they think of permanency and temporality. Children, in many ways, are raised for the moment because they don't know if there'll be a future. There is a, a terrible shock to the body, whether it recognizes or not, when it causes pain and injustice to another. We the context of Israel-Palestine there, and in many ways that's been transported over here, is a state of constant alert, of constant being hit at, whether it's through actual physical violence or through words. And so the body is in a sense of constant recovery that never gets to happen because there's another one around the corner. I
Thank
hope
you.
that helps.
Yes, I feel for those idea of soldiers returning with all that trauma. We have a speaker who speaks on U.S. policies in the Middle East and politics broadly, regularly here, and he has said that he doesn't think that talking about Zionism is helpful, that we should focus instead on human rights. What is your opinion of that? Thank you.
Well, I mean, there are many things that we talk about that are not the real issue. I mean, the human rights are the real issue, but we often, spend time talking about whether it's apartheid or not, whether it's, genocide or not, whether it's anti-Semitic or not, and whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. A lot of energy gets spent, especially here, in the diaspora, talking about ideas and concepts rather than the essence of humanity that, is is being damaged on a daily basis if you're living under occupation or if you're living in Israel under the threat of some violent attack by someone, whether it's Iran or rockets from Gaza. And we've seen that loss of humanity reach a mind-boggling high after October 7, where people became so polarized to the point that they saw the other either as a genocide supporter or a terrorism supporter. And as Chef was saying earlier, Hamas has been demonized so much that you can do anything to Gaza because of Hamas. And everything has been done to Gaza. I mean, the destruction at 80% destruction, all the institutions are gone. 55,000 plus people have been killed, and it continues. It continues every day. The toll today was, I think, 36 people were killed in Gaza, some of them while waiting in line for food. Yes, we need to be reminded of the humanity at the heart of this, and not get distracted by ideas and concepts and words and terms and so on.
Yes, I completely agree. I would add that it's important to often separate the political project of Zionism from a person who says they identify as a Zionist. So if someone identifies as a Zionist, I always ask them what they mean by it. We have done, there's actually been a lot of work done here in Canada about, so people will say 90 some percent of Jews will say, yes, I'm a Zionist. And then they're asked what they mean by it. And it drops to about 40% who think that it means doesn't matter what happens to Palestinians. As long as I have my state, it's all good. That actually they don't believe in the occupation. They don't believe in settlement expansion. So it's really important to sort of separate the political project of Zionism from a person who has a particular, sort of attachment to the land or to a particular idea.
Do you think there's such a thing as spiritual Zionism that's something different than political Zionism?
I refer to it, it's often referred to more as cultural Zionism. There is spiritual Zionism. I think the key part is what does I ask the question, what's Zionism to a Palestinian?
They're all the same.
That's my question. Is what is it to a Palestinian? That's what motivates me as a Jewish person. Is what does my proclamations impact or feel like to someone else? So I think that's what's important. I mean, do I personally like it? Yeah. I mean, if you're Jewish and you go, I live in a town that has very few Jews. If you go to Israel, everything stops at sundown on Friday night. And when sundown comes back on sundown on Saturday night, the entire city comes out to party. Of course, I like that there's a space to do that, but it's not worth it to me at the cost to somebody else. It's not worth it. If I get freedom at Raj's expense, it's not freedom.
We still have a lot of questions and only a few more minutes to ask them.
Okay,
So
that's usual.
if I don't get to everyone's question, I apologize for that. Are the effects of Israel vis-a-vis Palestinians a form of retribution or payback for years of persecution of Jews?
Wow. Do you want me to try to talk about that, Raja? Do you have something to say?
Go ahead. I'll see.
I I'm going to talk about it first, in the context of the past 20 months. The narrative of the prime narrative of the last 20 months has been about the term Israel has the right to defend itself. If the motivation at the beginning to get hostages back and to defeat or demilitarize, Hamas was the goal. I think you might be able to defend that for about 3 weeks. I think everything since then is based on retribution and retaliation. My greatest shame as a Jew is watching things done in my name that I think are just done to get even. I find that, really reprehensible. Long term, I think it's more important to understand that Jewish trauma and trauma in general takes away often or obfuscates the actual question of whether something is right or fair. It only becomes, is it good for me or bad for me? So I don't think the Jewish community is asking, is this about retribution? They're asking, does this keep me safer?
I remember one of the first things I learned when I started talking to Zionists is that to them, Israel was this small country in the middle of a sea of Muslim majority countries. They all want is to destroy Israel, and it's under constant existential threat. I came from a place of Israel being one of the most advanced, having one of the most advanced armies in the world with high technological expertise, best weaponry provided by the United States, that had kicked the ass of Arabs in 1948 and in 1967 and continues to occupy Palestinian land. It had never occurred to me to think of Israel as, this little tiny country that is under threat, existential threat. To me, it was the opposite. It was Israel that was an existential threat to me as a Palestinian. But that's the prevailing, wisdom, or the prevailing sentiment, I should say, is that like Jews historically, Israel is also a small minority that is facing existential threat on a daily basis. They often had.
Yes.
Coming back to the topic of trauma, what can enter through the recurrence of trauma? And does the work of Gahor Mote, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, show any pathway? If you're familiar with
Sure.
that author.
Sure, very much. Gabor Mate is someone we're very familiar with. So, yes, I think the essence, in a short answer, is I know we have to go in a second. I want you to be able, the audience, to sort of break it down to the personal. If you've had a schism, with a close family member that was caused by an event or action where you went separate ways because you couldn't face the repercussions or pain of that event. If you've experienced healing from that harm, how did it come? It didn't come from convincing the other that you were right and they were wrong. It came from the relationship being more important than any event or experience that you had. So I think the essence of healing for trauma is not about focusing on what the trauma is. It's focusing on, is there something bigger and more important than the trauma that is going to guide our moving forward?
Wow, I think that's really beautiful. That's probably a good place to leave it. We are at time kind of, so thank you so much, Raja and Jeffrey.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
Thank you very much. Just to wrap up, please come back next Sunday. We'll have Bill Shields. He's a labor organizer, and he's kicking off Labor Fest. I've learned about Labor Fest from Melvin, who arranged the speaker for us next Sunday. And then at 12:30 in this room, we'll be having 3 students from USF who are in the law school there that were part of the encampment movement a year ago. They spoke, I think one of them at least was here last year. They'll be talking about immigration and free speech rights of students. So please see you next week. Thank you.